Okay, so next up we're going to look at this guy called Kohlberg. So Kohlberg was interested in moral development. He was a little bit like Piaget in that he had stages, but there's a couple of pretty key differences with Piaget and Kohlberg. So Kohlberg's got 3 stages that he breaks down into 2 sort of sub-stages. So in the end, he's got 6 stages. But he's a bit different to Piaget in that he said not everyone moves through all the stages. He said it's not uncommon for an adult, for example, to be still at stage 3 of reasoning, of moral development reasoning. He also said you didn't have to necessarily move through the stages sequentially. So you might skip, for example, stage 2, or you might spend a very short amount of time in stage 2. So he was a little bit different to Piaget. Kohlberg's also different because he doesn't necessarily tell us how a person will respond. So I'll give you an example. Kohlberg worked, one of his most famous examples was the moral dilemma of Heinz. And with Heinz, you've got this guy, his wife's dying, he's kind of poor, he could go and get this drug to help out his wife, but he can't afford it. So basically, Kohlberg posed the question, should Heinz steal the drug? Would it be ethical for him to steal the drug? Now with Piaget, you'll remember that he predicted what a child would respond depending on which stage they were in. So for example, when he did the egocentrism test, remember that one with the cards? It's got the star on one side, it's got the circle on the other. Piaget predicted if you asked a 3-year-old, what can you see? And the kid can see a star, they'll say it's a star. And then you say to that same kid, what can I see? And remember, you're looking at the circle. Piaget said the 3-year-old child will say, you can see a star, because the 3-year-old can see the star, even though you're looking at the back of the card, which has the circle. So Piaget actually predicted what the response would be, depending on which stage the kid was in. Kohlberg was quite different. Kohlberg said with any different moral dilemma, in any stage, you could either say, for example, with Heinz, you could either say Heinz should steal it or should not steal it. Kohlberg wasn't actually interested in what choice you made, whether you should steal it or should not steal it. What Kohlberg was interested in was your reasoning, why you said that he should either steal it or not steal it. And he said at different ages or different development levels, people will have different reasons for whether they think it's right or wrong. So he said it doesn't actually matter if you say that Heinz should steal the drug or he should not steal the drug. What Kohlberg was interested in was your reasoning behind whether or not you should steal the drug. So if we have a quick look at some of his stages, and this is from your textbook 217 to 219, he starts off in the pre-conventional stage, which according to Kohlberg is, roughly about 0 to 9 years, although as we said, it's quite different to Piaget. Kohlberg's stages are much more fluid, much more interchangeable. Definitely it's not as clear cut as 0 to 9. But let's say roughly pre-conventional 0 to 9. He said you'll start off in stage 1, which is all about obedience and punishment. So basically, he said the first way that kids learn about morals and about their ethics is when you're at home and you're a little kid and you do something wrong, you've got a series of rules, you do something wrong, you get in trouble. So he said basically little kids, they decide what's right or wrong because they want to avoid punishment. So if you've got a kid at home who, for example, draws on the wall with a crayon and the mum yells at them and tells them off, from now on they'll probably think that drawing on the wall is wrong, not necessarily because they think it's a morally wrong thing to do or it's sort of ethically a travesty. They'll think it's wrong because they like to avoid punishment. They don't want their mum to yell at them again. So as a little kid, he said stage 1, it's all about obedience and punishment. There are rules that I should follow so that I don't get in trouble. Then he said you might move into stage 2, which he called the naively egotistical orientation. Basically what he's talking about here is that kids will often, sometimes even adults, will often do things that they believe are right because they want to receive a reward for that right behaviour. So a kid at home, for example, might see, the 9-year-old might see that his mum's struggling, or dad, struggling to get all the dishes done after dinner. So he goes and offers to help, even though it's not his night to do the chores, because he thinks that he might receive some sort of reward like praise or even a treat later on. So stage 2 is kind of all about getting a reward for the right behaviour. Kohlberg then went on to talk about the conventional level, which again he roughly sort of said 9 to 15 years, but he also acknowledged that a lot of adults will be in this stage, he believes. Basically here we've got stage 3 is the subsection, the good boy / nice girl orientation. And he said people who are kind of in this stage or this level, basically this is about wanting to please others. to obtain praise from people who are important in their life. So that can be people like parents, teachers, friends, peer group. Basically, you kind of want to do the right thing to gain social acceptance. Now, it's a little bit more advanced than the pre-conventional stage, where you want to do the right thing to avoid punishment or to receive some sort of, maybe tangible reward. It's more that you want to gain social acceptance. So you sort of want to do or say things that you believe your social group or your parents or your authority figures in your life, what they think would be acceptable. So you kind of, you don't want to stand out, you want to be socially accepted. Then Kohlberg talked about stage 4, the law and order social maintenance orientation stage, which is quite a big name, which basically just means, he's talking really here about adolescents. And he said generally their focus will kind of shift to social institutions such as the law, school, or in some cases, church. Basically, the adolescent in this stage really wants to avoid the guilt and the shame which will come from criticism by authoritative figures such as police, teachers, potentially even priests if they're religious. So instead of just conforming to gain social approval, like in stage 3, it tends to be more about social order. You follow the rules of society and you follow the law because you feel that there's some sort of, if it's the law, then it must be right to follow it. So even if in fact the law was perhaps a little bit unjust, you tend to think, well, most laws are good. Thou shalt not kill. That's a good law. So you tend to think, oh, okay, if it's a law, it's probably morally wrong. I shouldn't break the law. So in stage 4, it's mostly about assuming that the general rules and social norms that are probably right, and so you should probably kind of follow them. Stage 4 reasoning is generally probably a little bit more advanced than stage 3 because it's not just about your peer group, social acceptance maybe from your peers, possibly even from teachers, possibly even from family. It's sort of a bit bigger than that. It's like, okay, what does society expect I should do? Society thinks I shouldn't steal something from that shop, so it's probably the right thing not to steal something from that shop. Then finally, Kohlberg's got his post-conventional stage, stage 5. He talks about this legalist social contract, basically saying that moral principles start to develop that are basically about avoiding interfering with the rights of others. So he said in this stage you start to think about, well, other people have rights, and one of those rights is that I shouldn't interfere with them, I shouldn't hurt them, I shouldn't go out of my way to hurt them, and neither should anybody else. So you're actually starting to now think not only about your own actions, but also about other people's actions. This is when you start to realise that laws aren't necessarily fixed. So just because it's a law that says one thing doesn't mean that law in fact can't be changed, and therefore it doesn't mean that that law can't be wrong. So this is probably, stage 4. Person in stage 4 probably never challenges a law. If that's the law, that's the law, and I dare not speak out against it. Stage 5, we're starting to get into, hang on, just because it's the law, maybe that's a bad law. So to give you sort of an historical example, maybe back in the days when, let's take, for example, when there was segregation, when black people weren't allowed into a white person's pub, for example. Somebody in stage 4 might say, well, that's the law and therefore it must be right. Somebody in stage 5 might say, hang on, actually there's a problem with that law. That's a bad law. Let's change the law. And then finally, Kohlberg talked about stage 6. He called this the universal ethical orientation. And this is when the person really starts to no longer think about what the majority of people want to do. They start to really develop what he sort of refers to, I guess, as a conscience. So this is highly individual moral beliefs, and often the person's, or sometimes the moral belief of the person can really conflict with society's views of what's right and wrong. So if you think about the very first white person that ever said, hang on, I don't think it's fair that black people can't come to the same pub as I can, they were probably, in stage 6. They're really going against what society at the time said, but they're really basing that on what they individually believe is acceptable and fair for everybody. Now, not all people will move through all stages, as we said. Kohlberg, in fact, said a lot of adults basically are in this conventional stage, stage 3 and 4, and he said really only a few people make it to stage 5 and 6. Generally, although he talks about moral development, and he's not talking about intellectual development, he does acknowledge that there's a certain level of intellectual development that must occur before you can reach these post-conventional stages. You sort of have to have a certain level of factual information and knowledge before you can possibly get to this stage. Sometimes it's easiest to understand Kohlberg's theory if we have a look at it as an example. So if you flick your textbooks open to page 220, we'll go back to that idea of the case of Heinz. So as I said at the start, Kohlberg didn't say with his moral dilemmas, it didn't matter what you said, whether you said Heinz should or should not steal the drugs. What it mattered was how you justified your decision. That's how he could say which stage he believed you were in. So, for example, you've got here stage 1, the pre-conventional level. Let's say somebody says that Heinz should steal it. Now, their reason might be it isn't really bad to take it. It's not like he didn't ask to pay for it first. The drug he'd taken is only worth $2,000. He's not really taking a $2,000 drug. So really, this person's basically kind of saying, well, he's going to avoid punishment. There's not perhaps such a big punishment. Therefore, stealing it might be okay. On the other hand, a person in this stage might say, look, it's a big crime. He won't get permission, and will be, he'll need to use force to break into the shop. He'll do a lot of damage, stealing a very expensive drug, and damaging the store too. So probably what they're really worried about is the fact that he's going to end up getting punished. As you can see, if you read through all of that information on page 220, basically what Kohlberg's really about, as I said, it's not the decision to steal or not steal, it's the reasoning behind it. And as you get further and further and further down, the reasoning becomes more complicated as you go down the levels. So he said you could argue steal it and be at any one of the stages. You could argue not steal it and be any one of the stages. It's about how you reason. So I guess to kind of summarize it super quickly, let's say, for example, somebody at the stage 1 might say, don't steal it just to avoid punishment because you don't want to go to jail. If that's their reason for saying don't steal it, then they're probably in this stage. On the other hand, if they said don't steal it because your wife might be upset with you for stealing it because she thinks stealing is wrong, even though you're stealing it to help her, you're talking about this, you want to be rewarded for the right behaviour. If the person said don't steal it because it's socially unacceptable to steal, they're probably in stage 3. If they said don't steal it because it's against the law and the police might think you're a bad person, or God might judge you poorly for stealing, they're probably in this stage 4. If they said don't steal it because the shop owner has a right to make money from his drug, you might be looking at this level here. It's about avoiding interfering the rights with others. If the person said don't steal it because it's simply morally wrong to steal at all times, no matter what, potentially they're looking at a stage 6. On the other hand, you could say steal it and still be at all of these different stages. So somebody at the obedience and punishment stage might say you should steal it because if you do it in the middle of the night, you won't get punished because no one will ever catch you. So if the reason behind stealing it is all about, well, you won't get punished because you're going to get away with it, they're really still thinking at this level. They're still only thinking about whether or not they're getting punished or not. So they're still working at a fairly low level. If they say you should steal it because your wife will live and then she'll like you, you're probably looking at this kind of praise from your wife, stage 2. If you say steal it because people will understand that you stole it because your wife was going to die and therefore they won't judge you for stealing, you might be looking at a stage 3 person. If they say steal it because people might judge you if you don't steal it because you let your wife die, maybe you're looking at a stage 4. If a person says steal it because your wife ultimately has the right to live and the company's doing the wrong thing by not making it more accessible and cheaper, then you might be talking about somebody in stage 5. And if you said steal it because ultimately, the drugs should be available to everyone, healthcare should be available to everyone because you feel on a more moralistic level that just because your wife's sick doesn't mean that she shouldn't have access to every possible thing available to her, then possibly you're talking about somebody in stage 6. So basically the take-home message here with Kohlberg is that it doesn't matter which choice you make in any of his moral dilemmas, it's how you justify that decision that he says sort of determines whether or not you're being so-called, which stage you are in. Okay, so that's a lot of information to take in. Have another look back through your book and then move on with looking at the 60 Minutes clip, which talks about Claire, who's already had a liver transplant and her current liver's about to pack it in, and ask what I want you to do with the sheet that's on your handout, which looks somewhat like this. So have a look at the 60 minutes clip, which is on that link there. And then in pairs, have a think about what you think a person in each stage would say. So in other words, if someone in stage 1, obedience and punishment orientation, so they're all about basically trying to avoid punishment, if they say they think that she should get another liver, kind of come up with a reason you think that they might say why they might have said that. If you said that they would say she should not get another liver, what might their reasoning be? And then think about person in the stage 2. If their decision was she should get another liver, what might their reasoning be? If they say she should not get another liver, what might their reasoning be? Stage 3, stage 4, etc.